Abhimanyu Mishra is one step closer to becoming a grandmaster. Welcome to Chess Dog. My name is John Montgomery, and today we're going to look at another game of Abhimanyu. He has now achieved all the rating points he needs to become a grandmaster. To become a grandmaster, you have to jump through a number of hoops. One of those is to reach a rating of 2,500. It can be in the middle of a tournament. It doesn't even have to be at the end of a tournament, but you have to just touch that 2,500 rating. He has now done that. So he only needs one more grandmaster norm. And a norm means basically you have to achieve a certain standard in a tournament, what they think a grandmaster would normally achieve. If you do that 3 times, that's the number of norms you need. Well, that's all he has to do. He's already done it twice. He's one more grandmaster norm. I think, again, outside of the World Championship, this is the biggest story in chess. Today we're going to look at a game he played against Grandmaster Brandon Jacobson in 2020. He begins with the move e4. His opponent plays c5, knight f3, knight c6, and Abhimanyu plays d4, the open Sicilian. cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, d6, the classical Sicilian. Unlike the dragon or Najdorf, the dragon black plays g6, the Najdorf black plays a6. Those are pawn moves. Here, black's trying to get as many pieces out as possible. This way, he's not just going to get attacked viciously right out of the opening. Abhimanyu plays the most common move in this position, bishop to g5, known as the Richter-Rauzer attack. These days, sometimes people just call it the Rauzer, but still officially the Richter-Rauzer. And he's threatening to take that knight on f6 and weaken black's pawn structure. So black plays e6 so he can recapture with the queen. Queen d2 defends that bishop on g5, clears the back rank, so now white can castle long. a6 keeps a piece out of that b5 square and threatens to expand. Long castle, bishop to d7. What black would like to do is take that knight on d4, or even better, have white take his knight on c6, play that bishop to c6, and threaten the pawn on e4 and support a pawn push to d5. White plays the most aggressive move, f4. He can also play f3, but f4 is the most aggressive. Black develops his last minor piece. Now, again, I said black would like to take on d4. Abhimanyu retreats the knight back to f3. He says, I don't want you to take that knight. I have more space, so I want to leave pieces on the board. Black can exchange the knights and put his bishop on c6. By the way, if you're getting value from this video, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. So black expands on the queen side. White's king is over there, so you might as well gain some space. White plays bishop takes f6. Black has to retake with the pawn now, because otherwise the queen would take that d6 pawn if the bishop had taken on f6. And white plays the king to b1. So now the battle lines are drawn. White has a safer king and more space. Black has the 2 bishop advantage and a more flexible pawn structure. And in a position like this, black has no problem trading queens. Black would like to trade queens and get into a position where his 2 bishops can really shine and his less safe king isn't so important. He plays the queen to b6, controlling a key diagonal, bishop to d3. Black castles long. There's lots of open space around that king on the queen side, a little bit dangerous. White centralizes, the rook h to e1, king goes to b8. Now, what white would like to do is to play the pawn to f5, then black respond with e5, and then play that knight right into that d5 square. It would attack the queen at b6 and the bishop at e7, and he would have a completely strategically won position. But Abhimanyu knows if he plays f5, black doesn't have to respond with e5. And he notices a tactic here, a really good eye. He sees that he can jump into d5 with that knight right now anyway, even though the square is controlled, and he does. Knight to d5, exclamation point, attacking the queen and the bishop at e7. Black takes the knight, he really has to. Pawn takes pawn, and now the pawn at d5 is attacking the knight at c6. The rook at e1 is attacking the bishop at e7. Black has to give the piece back. So he gives the piece back in the best way he can. He plays knight to e5, giving back the knight and sort of restoring a little bit his broken central pawn structure. Pawn takes, pawn takes. So in this position, what black would like to do is to play f5 and get that mobile pawn center going. f5, bishop f6, d4, e4, you know, get those pawns going. Abhimanyu knows this, and he plays queen to h6. You notice one key signature of Abhimanyu's games. He's always using little tactics to prevent his opponent from carrying out their strategic goals. So in this case, black can't play f5 because he'd play knight takes e5, and the knight could not be captured because there's a pin lengthwise. Pawn takes knight, queen would take the queen, and the game would be over. So he's preventing f5 indirectly. Queen goes to c7, now the pin is no longer there. Queen to h5. Now he's directly controlling the f5 square and hitting the f7 pawn. Black plays rook d to g8. If he tried to play rook to f8 to sort of force through that f5 move, white could play knight to d4. And the pawn is pinned. He could take the knight, but after rook e7, again, strategically, he would be busted. Rook hg8, then bishop f5, trying to exchange off light-squared bishops because he would love to have a knight on a light square against that dark-squared bishop. Rook g5, queen h3, bishop f5, knight f5. In this variation, white would be in very, very good shape. So black plays the rook to g8. Queen takes f7, bishop to e8, hitting the queen goes to f5, rook g2. Now notice there's a square on e4 that white would love to put a piece on, because a piece on that square, now that the f-pawn is gone, you couldn't get rid of it with a pawn. So he plays rook to d2, inviting an exchange of rooks so the knight could take the rook and maybe pop into the e4 square. His goal is to get a knight versus a dark squared bishop, that the knight on e4. That would be very strong. So rook d2, knight d2, bishop g6, queen f3, rook f8, queen e3. That queen is aiming towards black's king, even though the squares are covered at the moment. Bishop to h4, hitting the rook at e1. Rook f1, knight f1. Now, black makes a strategic decision here to go into an endgame. He knows the endgame is worse, but he feels he might be able to hold it. So queen a7, queen takes a7, king takes a7, bishop g6, hg6. So now white has gotten the minor piece arrangement he wants. A knight versus the dark squared bishop, with the knight able to maneuver to the e4 square. Knight d2, king b6, knight e4. That knight is incredibly strong. It controls c5, which means the king can't easily get into the position, and he's constantly pressuring d6. Now, ignore what computers say here. The computers say, yeah, this is even, but that only assumes black is making perfect moves, move after move. For humans, this is a very strong endgame for white. Bishop back to e7 to defend the pawn, c3 to allow the king to enter the position, a5, king c2, king b3, excuse me, king to c7, king b3. Now, what white wants to do is to penetrate on the queen side, play a4, and get in with either the a4 or c4 square with his king. King b7, a4, bishop takes b takes a4 check, king a4, king b6. Now he plays h3. That's just a move to make sure that pawn is on a light square and the dark squared bishop will never be able to capture it. Bishop to f8, b4, ab4, cb4. So now white has a better minor piece, a better king, and an outside pass pawn. Even still, computers say this is even and black can hold. But even still, in the real world, this is really tough. Bishop e7. Black just has to shuffle back and forth and hope to keep white out. b5, bishop f8, king to b4, bishop h6, king c4, king c7. White can just continue to make threats until eventually black cracks, which he does. Knight c3, king to b6, knight e4, king c7, knight f6. And with the prospect of never-ending threats that white can just make for an eternity, Black makes a mistake. Bishop to g7. Knight e8 check. A fork. Double attack on the king at c7 and the bishop on g7. And the Grandmaster Brandon Jacobson resigned. So this is another terrific example of the young talent Abhimanyu Mishra, who has until September 5th to get his last Grandmaster norm, having done everything else he needs to do. I am certainly rooting for his success. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog, and please stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.